Welcome to Thursday's edition of Renew Plus. I'm Pastor Tony. Thank you for joining us again today. Again, we're in week number 9 of our series, The New and Living Way. We are renewing our minds to the new covenant way of living. And I tell you, it's so much different than the old covenant mindset and belief system that we really have to go over this again and again and be diligent about it, so that God, by the Holy Spirit on the inside of us, can build these truths and realities in us, and so that we have a conscience that's free of guilt and shame from the old, and we can approach God and live in His presence with confidence and with boldness. Now I want to go back to where we left off yesterday, Hebrews chapter 5, Hebrews the 5th chapter, and beginning with verse number 12. It says, "For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food." Now again, like we said yesterday, this whole book right here of Hebrews is written to a group of believers who came in by faith, were born again, but because of pressure, persecution, and false teaching that came in, that presented that in order to be perfect and go on to perfection and completion, they were going to have to go back to the works of the law. They're going to have to go back to that system of fleshy works in order to make themselves perfect. And so really this whole discussion right here is undoing that kind of mindset and presenting that this new covenant is so much far better and superior than the old. Why would you even think about going back to the old system of the way things used to be? And so a lot of this is just presenting new covenant realities. And what do new covenant teachings and truths and realities do for us? Well, it rids us, it undoes, uproots, eradicates, and eliminates that old consciousness of sin that was created under the old covenant of law and reinforced. And it presents to us a conscience that's free from guilt, shame, and condemnation, where we have full confidence and boldness to approach God and live in His presence. And so they're regressing right here. And He is correcting them pretty sharply right here with this language. He is correcting them for regressing from the new covenant mindset back to the old system of law. And so that's why He says, you ought to be teachers by now. But now you're going to have to go back to kindergarten. You know, you ought to be graduated from and have a master's degree now from the Master himself. And you ought to be teaching other people and helping them renew their minds to the new covenant lifestyle and mindset. But you've regressed and gone back to kindergarten. And He says, now you're going to have to be taught again the first principles of the oracles of God, and you have come to need milk and not solid food. In other words, you've regressed to the point now where it's not just kindergarten, we're talking about nursery school now. You've left being able to eat meat and solid food, and you're gone back to the bottle again. And that's what He is telling us. When we leave the new covenant and go back to the old, it's like regressing from solid food, from an adult state, back to a nursery state of being back on the bottle again. That is not a flattering picture right now that He's painting for them. Verse 13, He says, "For everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness, for he is a babe." Now I want you to see this way he states this right here. He says, everyone who partakes only of milk. What is milk? That would be the old covenant mindset, or the old covenant law, the system of works, the self-righteous mentality and belief system. It says everyone who partakes only of milk, is on the bottle, is unskilled in the word of righteousness. Now I want you to see this right here. He didn't say he's unskilled in the works of righteousness. See, many times we're bringing that kind of Old Testament system of works over into the New Covenant, and many times we're trying to make righteousness works. But I want you to see right here that righteousness is a message. This word, the word translated word here, the word for word, is the Greek word logos, and it means message or teaching, or we can even say doctrine. So he says, whoever is still on milk, on the bottle, is there because they're unskilled in the word, the message, the teaching, the doctrine of righteousness. What's he referring to right here? The only kind of righteousness of which you can approach God, which is the righteousness of faith, is justification by faith. And if you're unskilled in that message right there, in other words, you're basically surface oriented, then you're going to still remain on milk. You're going to stay on the bottle. And see, this kind of growth and development is not because of just the passage of time and age, having birthdays. It's by reason of use. It's being skilled in and operating and living a life of faith, a life in the message of righteousness. He said, for he is a babe. He goes on to say, for he is a babe. Then verse 14 says, but solid food, that would be someone who is skilled in the word of righteousness, but solid food belongs to those who are of full age. In other words, that is those who by reason of use have their senses exercised to discern both good and evil. There's a lot we can say about that right there, but you have to be able to discern the fact that men and we in and of ourselves and the flesh and natural men are not good enough to produce this kind of righteousness. No, we're still by all standards in comparison with absolute good, which is God, which is Jesus. That's perfection. That is absolute 100% purely good. In relationship, in comparison to that, men are evil. And we need to be able to understand the fact that we in and of ourselves cannot produce goodness and righteousness by and of ourselves. It is only originated by the good God, the one who is 100% absolutely good, and that is God himself. Now, with that in mind, I want you to notice as we leave this chapter and we're going to go over to Romans chapter 6. Romans 6, it says again in verse 13, for everyone who partakes only of milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness. And again, I said that word is logos in the Greek, can be translated teaching or doctrine. Now I know a lot of people, they say, well, I don't want to talk about all that doctrine. Well, you have a doctrine whether you like it or not. Anytime you subject yourself to any kind of teaching, whatever it might be, that is a doctrine. Okay, a lot of people think doctrine, well, that's seminary graduates, that's dry stuff. I know that there's a lot of doctrine that is dry. Religion is dry. You know why religion and doctrine can be dry? Because God's not in it. But when God's in it, it's full of life. That's the difference between the Word of God and the Word of righteousness and the Word of the works of men or the Word of the law. It is extracted from God. God's not in it. God is the only thing that gives life to anything. And let me tell you something, your doctrine is important. What you're subjecting yourself to being taught is going to develop your belief system. That's why doctrines are important. Because whatever you're subjecting yourself to be taught, or your doctrine, what you believe to be true in life, is going to translate over into a belief system. And that's either going to set you free or that's going to bring you in bondage. It's going to benefit and profit you, or it's going to produce all kind of bad things in your life, undesirable things in your life. It's going to result in the life of God in you, or it's going to result in death. It's going to result in the blessing in your life, or it's going to turn around and result in the curse being manifested in your life. So is your doctrine, is it important? Absolutely, unequivocally, yes, it is important. Now, a lot of people, they sit under teachings from churches that are basically more light and frothy, is what I like to say. They're surface level. They're milk, so to speak. It's all a matter of what you do. It's all formulas and, what you do and do these 5 things and you'll get this. There's nothing wrong with that. And there is a time for that if it's centered on the new covenant realities and truths right here. But if it's man-centered, it's always going to end up in death. It's always going to end up in a curse. It's always going to lead you into bondage somewhere and keep you in a immature babyhood state of Christianity. I like to say it this way: if you're just subjecting yourself to light and frothy messages, light and frothy is okay as long as things are going hunky-dory in your life. But let me tell you, you're not going to live very long, and you're going to mash your nose up, your face up against a brick wall of impossibility where you have no answer for it, you have no strength for it, you have no power for it. It's going to take something higher than you, above your pay grade, so to speak, as I like to say. It's going to take God intervening, God being in your life. Well, that's where we need to know, go beyond just a bottle of milk and be skilled in the word of righteousness, be skilled in the doctrine, the teaching of the new covenant. That's why we're doing these teachings right here. That's why I'm not just, just satisfied with just giving you very surface things right here. We're taking you down into these teachings right here. They're not deep, they're just different. But listen, we have to go into these and renew our minds to these. Otherwise, your doctrine, your belief system is going to lead you into things that domination of the devil in your life, Satan in your life, is going to lead you into bondage. It's going to lead you into all kinds of things, even as a believer. Jesus said it this way in John chapter 8, verse 31, 30, and 32. He says, and those who take my word and listen to it are my disciples indeed. And he said, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Well, what is being a disciple? Continuing in the words of Jesus. What are the words of Jesus? It's the words of the new covenant. These are the words that we're talking about right here. The word of righteousness, the gospel of Jesus. And see, once you become skilled in that right there, then you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Now here in Romans 6, I told you to go over there a few minutes ago. Romans, the 6th chapter, and notice here from verse number 16. Now I've taught on Romans 6 in detail before in other lessons and other series, so I don't have time to go into that per se. But verse 16, he says, do you not know? In other words, you're supposed to know this right here. This is supposed to be the reality of your life. This is the word of righteousness he's talking about. He said, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves slaves to obey, you are that one slaves to whom you obey, whether sin leading to death or of obedience leading unto righteousness. And he's talking to believers here, and he's saying to them and asking them, do you not know this right here? And he says, even as a believer, you can present yourself as a slave to whatever you obey. Now, what is the obedience, or what is he talking about obeying here? Verse number 17, look at this very closely. He says, but God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart the form of doctrine, teaching. What is that he's talking about? The word of his righteousness right here. See, the main part, now there are other levels of obedience that pertain to this, but the main obedience that we all have under the new covenant is believing the right message, believing the gospel message, the justification of faith, the word of righteousness. We have to believe that. See, that's the obedience that gives way to all the other things. See, because what you believe to be true, your belief system that is formed by your teaching, your doctrine, what you believe to be true is going to determine what you experience in life. It's going to determine what fruit you bear in life. It's going to determine your behavior. Your believing is going to determine your behavior. See, we kind of focus in modern day religion many times on behavior modification, where we should be dealing first of all with the heart issue right here, which is what you believe to be true, what teaching, doctrine, what word you are believing right here. Again, your doctrine, your teaching forms your belief system. Your belief system forms your actions, your behavior. See, it comes from the inside out. We don't deal with things from the outside in. Jesus didn't do that. God doesn't do this in the new birth. He deals with us from the inside out. And so notice he said, yet you obeyed from the heart. How did we do that? By believing it, by mixing our faith with it. Yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine. What is the form of doctrine he's talking about? The word of righteousness, new covenant, the gospel of Christ, to which you were delivered. In other words, we preached it to you and you believed it. In other words, when you believed it, mixed your faith with the message you heard, the gospel message of Jesus, then you obeyed from the heart. And what does that do? That takes us out of being slaves of sin. That takes that sin consciousness out, that dominion of sin out. See, he had said earlier their sin should have no more dominion over you. Why? Because we're dead to sin. Sin has been done away with. It's been uprooted. But you can still have a consciousness of sin, and that consciousness of sin, sin consciousness, will still rule and reign over you, exercise dominion over you, present condemnation, guilt, and shame that affects your outward behavior. But he says when we obey from the heart, the form of doctrine, the word of righteousness that sets us free from the consciousness of sin, condemnation, and shame, and frees us to serve the living God. Well, that's all the time I've got for today. I ran over a little bit again today. Didn't know where to stop here. Join us again tomorrow as we pick up from here. If you'd like additional materials, go to tonycowan.org and we will see you tomorrow.